What is community broadcasting? This, as will become quickly apparent, is a surprisingly complex question to answer. You see, it all depends on your perspective and who you ask. In this short series of interviews, we will hear from several champions of community broadcasting, people that represent the complexity of the sector. It's certainly not an exhaustive exploration. There are many others that we should have heard from too. And our hope is we will one day be able to return to the story so we can capture more. As someone who's been involved in the sector since it began, I have a personal interest in this unfolding story. So lean in with me as we connect with just a few voices and discover the rich, interesting and empowering stories that have birthed from what we call community broadcasting. In your own words, what does community broadcasting mean to you?
The voice of the people, vox populi. The voice of the people goes on mattering. You don't have to be some right-wing extremist to talk about the importance of the voice of the people, but the voice of the people is terribly important.
It's important in building connection between individuals and organisations, in making a broader range of ideas and opinions and perspectives available to be considered and discussed and debated.
Oh, wonderful variety of choices just in my own town, and I know it's duplicated particularly in the cities around Australia. So I'm a jazz fan, so I listen to a jazz station. I listen to occasionally Radio Adelaide, which is the station which began as 5UV that I was involved in, and a whole lot of other choices.
That's what's the magic of community radio, is that you can find something that somehow speaks into your heart, that lifts your soul and that fills you with joy and wonder.
To me, it works on so many levels that it will continue to be successful if we can maintain the ability to be across all platforms at all times. And that's been a key challenge in the last 10 years particularly, I guess 20 years particularly.
Language, I always get excited about listening to language on radio because that means that what people did 30 or 40 years ago in trying to get some broadcasting happening, in trying to get access to media, is totally relevant today. They've got their story, they've got their broadcast, and they've got that language being supported and culture being supported.
My memory of those times, one of the things that stands out is the very close relationship between the sector and politicians of both persuasions in terms of development of legislation and regulation. How do you think that came about?
The really important thing about the association was that it gave legitimacy to community broadcasting. Here was a body that said, we're properly set up and we've got policy questions that either you have to answer, or even better, we're bringing you policy that we think is good, please get it fixed. And so we were able to bring in, really good policy minds. They both happened to be involved in a fine music station, at least, what they wanted to be a fine music station, 2MBS. So Michael Law and Peter Pockley, they were really good minds that could bring to government a cogent argument for why this had to happen. We really were very fortunate, I think, that then we had a really progressive minister in Tony Staley who got it, and he went on with it. So we need, I guess in a way that's probably the other vital link. You need continuity and you need bipartisan support, and we had it.
We did establish a very good relationship with governments of all colours and politicians of all colours, and ensured that the interests of the community were always on their agenda somewhere, maybe not very high, but they were there. People like Tony Staley, he's a prime example of someone who always, as minister, but also always later, maintained a really strong interest in what we were up to and what we were doing.
I did one or two naughty things because I knew it would be controversial if I took it to Cabinet. I didn't, in fact, take the system to Cabinet. I, in fact, wrote to the Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, and said, this is in accordance with party policy, so I do not need to take it to Cabinet. And he came back and gave me a tick. So that was a fantastic breakthrough, and we were able to do it like that.
We had a community broadcasting seminar late in 74, by which time we'd been offered the licence. It was about saying to the community, what would you like to do with it? And we had a whole heap of ethnic community broadcasters lined up. They were the main sort of big interest groups. And so within a few months, early in 1975, suddenly we had access radio working.
And in what ways have you seen community media contribute to the enrichment of the Australian people and culture and society?
That happen in a lot of different ways, whether it's just a single person's experience of feeling valued and having that opportunity to get on a microphone and say what they think and share their opinion. I think that is very powerful and very enriching for a person. I think I've seen it from the other side as well, of people sharing stories about how they heard that person on air and how having that reflected back to them was also incredibly important and incredibly enriching.
I think community broadcasting has actually become a voice for groups. Sure, it's not the only voice. There are other ways of doing it, but it has been a really strong rallying point for people of creative persuasions or of political persuasions or of, you name it, persuasions, to say we can do things, we can voice our concerns, we can voice our interests through this outlet. And it is, it's hard yakka. There's a lot of work involved, but it's cheap. And in fact, to most of the creators, mercifully, the station says, in you come. There's no upfront cost. That's a massive difference, isn't it? If you're starting something or if you're wanting to run a movement and you want to make it happen, community radio usually says, yeah, come through the door, we'll talk about it. Or you want a slot? Okay, here we go.
From a Joy perspective, we see it every single day. We receive text messages and emails, and they're not just, hey, love what you're doing. There are stories of people coming out and how important Joy was in making that possible. They're stories of people feeling isolated at home in their bedroom, young people saying, I'm listening and you're keeping me alive, literally. We hear that every single day, and it's sometimes hard to hear, but it's also really good to hear because we know the work we're doing is important. And I think that, community broadcasting has brought people together and will continue to bring people together all around the country.
In many ways, for many different groups. Of course, we've talked about ethnic broadcasting and how important community radio was in actually reorganising or organising or establishing their own communities. But of course, that goes for how many defined music broadcasters. The MBS stations, they provide a service that at the time was also not available anywhere else. The same goes for the cultural or the Aboriginal broadcasting stations and the success of things like Karma in Alice Springs and how important they've been for their communities. And then the many stations that cater to independent music producers and makers and the educational radio stations as well, that are connected to universities. There are so many aspects of people contributing to so many different aspects of the cultural, social life of a country, of Australia, that that makes it important still.
What unique role do you think community broadcasting plays in the wider Australian story?
We are there specifically to provide inclusive media that is diverse, that's covering issues that aren't in the mainstream media, or maybe covering them from a different angle, covering them from a local angle. So we're there to provide that unique presence of being community owned, community controlled, and the community deciding on what is being covered. And being not for profit, again, is very important within that mix, because it puts us in a different position to be able to actually value community focused things rather than always focusing on profit and ensuring that there's a profit motive in play there.
So community radio and broadcasting has been really good for the First Nations media industry. It gave us access. It gave us access to the to broadcasting. We're then able to tell our stories, to put to air our issues. We're then able to build those skills to be able to do those things professionally and consistently, and that. So community radio and broadcasting has been really good for the First Nations media industry. And there are something like 200 broadcasters, First Nations broadcasters across the country. There are many people that are making their way with the commercial and the national broadcaster, the ABC and the SBS as well. You know, I mean, that is just brilliant. 40 years on, you know, in those early days, it was like getting access to some airtime, and then getting some more airtime, and getting some more airtime, and then getting our own facility, our own license, all of those things. And it just, you know, it's just good to be able to get to see that happening before your eyes, and to be a part, might be a very small part of it, but as part of that industry that was growing. And, you know, community broadcasting has been good for the First Nations media industry.
It encouraged all sorts of good things like Australian music and the Australian voice, Australian drama, Australian people. And our culture is not just imported. It's the Australian voice, I'd say.
Like we know the local councillors, we know the local politician, we know a lot of the local businessmen. So it's not like living in the city. I've lived in cities a lot, and living in a country town, you're much more in touch with your audience and with the community.
What were some of the key achievements in your time in community broadcasting?
We were lucky in my experience in Perth, in that, you know, we managed to do some radio programming in Radio 6NR, and there was several of us, and then they gave us some time on different days, and then they put it all together, and we started to control what we were doing. And the beautiful thing is that because it's community radio, people came along, or did not come along, people did not come along and say, oh, you can't do that, or you can do this, but you can't do that. And we're going, you know. So this was carte blanche. This was free reign, and we were able to do those things for our community, broadcast news according to what our community wanted to hear, music, culture, language, all those sorts of things were very important for our community.
Yeah, I think we're incredibly proud of the inclusion and the diversity that we've had on air over decades. And I think First Nations, unions, queer community, disabled community, environmentalists, I think that we're proud of all of those different voices that have got to air.
And we've been through what they called a 1 in 100-year flood. The station was cut off. The main bridge into Taree was closed, and we had people there broadcasting around the clock. We also had horrific bushfires like lots of other places, and we managed to maintain broadcasting right through that, and were able to warn people to evacuate when we got the word from the authorities that they should be doing that. So
events like 9/11, huge tragedies, things that we can't find words for, that we don't know how to speak into. I don't think commercial radio has a clue how to do that. They can tell stories, they report news, they can do interviews, but how do you speak into people's hearts, the deep longing, the despair, the fear, the anxiety? That's something that a Christian faith or other faiths can do. And it was at that moment I thought, someone might never listen to Christian radio, but in their moments of total despair, I hope they know that there is a Christian station in their area that they could tune into if they wanted to. Because it is that in those places that you can find messages of hope and messages that speak of love and in value and joy.
To me, one of the major milestones, I think, in NRN's development was when a couple of years ago now, they employed their first journalist within the Federal Parliament press gallery. And I think that's a huge step forward for our sector, to have an inquiring voice at the centre of Australia's political life. We can develop a news service with our own distinct character and our own perspectives. I think we're only part of the way there, but I see that as possible in the future.
To what extent do you feel community broadcasting has succeeded?
I think it is succeeding because it provides an opportunity for people to put their energies into something which can provide so much to them individually and collectively to the audiences that are served.
I think it is succeeding, absolutely. I mean, there's hundreds of stations right across the country. Certainly some of them, we all struggle in particular ways, but I think by and large the sector is absolutely successful. That's not to say that we don't have a long way to go perhaps in terms of really actively providing media access to as many people as we can and as many issues as we can. But I think that we have been successful, and I think that we're certainly held up in the international space as far and away the most successful community broadcasting sector in the world.
It is succeeding, and it's very hard work, and it's exhausting. And it's exhausting because there's not adequate funding for our sector, and that's because I think people look at our sector as media instead of understanding the role we play in community, which is far greater than media. Media is our medium. Health and wellbeing is our role, connectedness, social inclusion. We need governments to change the way they think about funding our organisations. We need communities to change the way they think about funding our organisations.
And looking ahead, we now live in a media environment which is completely different from that when community broadcasting started. How do you think we need to change and adapt to remain relevant?
We need to adapt. We need to find the way to connect with our audience. And today, I think we're fortunate in that technology is becoming cheaper. Going digital is a very big leap for a lot of stations to take that leap. Joy has now taken that leap with some government assistance to help us relocate. And, it makes an enormous difference in cost, but it also gives enormous flexibility.
I think because the paradigms of media consumption have changed hugely over that time, such that the audience drives these days in so many ways. They decide their own content, they decide when they consume it. And I think it's successful when I look at my phone and I know that I have an app, the Community Broadcasting Plus app, Community Radio Plus app, I should say, in my pocket all the time.
We are in a completely different media environment, but there are many things that haven't changed. So in the 1970s, when the struggle for gaining licences was in play, some of the key things were that there was such a highly concentrated media ownership within Australia. Well, that hasn't changed. And also that people struggled to get access to media. So I think that while some things have changed, the distribution of power within the media space has not changed. So there remains an absolute need for community-owned and community-controlled media.